This is HOA consequences, and I have the paper trail. I work as a civil engineer, and I hate sloppy paperwork. So, when Tiffany Cooper marched up to my sedan in the Stonegate Reserve Parking Compliance Association lot in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, waving a citation slip and yelling that my car was in a fire lane, I knew something was off. The curb was gray. No red paint. No signage within 50 feet. She did not care. She slammed her small handheld stamp onto the slip and shoved it against my windshield, her short black bob whipping in the light drizzle that was already slicking the pavement and making my tires shine. "If you want mercy, move somewhere without an HOA," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I glanced down at the slip. It had today's date, a fee amount that made my stomach drop, and a threat that my car would be towed within 2 hours if I did not pay immediately. I looked back at her. She was the HOA treasurer, and everyone in Stonegate Reserve knew she weaponized fees like a personal vendetta. "I am not in a fire lane," I said, keeping my voice level. "Show me the ordinance." She laughed, a cold, clipped sound. "I do not have to show you anything." The board voted on this last night. New enforcement policy. Guest parking rules changed. If you are not displaying a valid decal, you are in violation. And guess what? Fire lane violations get towed immediately. I looked at my windshield. My resident decal was right there, visible through the glass. I pointed at it. "That is my decal. I live here." She did not even glance at it. "Decals expire at the end of the month. Yours is invalid, as of midnight. And you parked in a fire lane." I felt my jaw tighten. The stakes here were not just pride. I had a strict lender requirement tied to my mortgage that any HOA violation, especially one that went to collections or a lien, could trigger an immediate audit of my loan terms. I could not afford that kind of chaos. I needed to prove she was wrong before this spiraled. I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of the curb, the lack of markings, and her standing there with that stamp in her hand. She stepped closer, her bucket hat dripping rain onto my shoulder. "I will bury you in notices until you run out of printer ink," she said, her voice low and venomous. That line stuck with me. It felt rehearsed, like she had said it before to someone else. I pocketed my phone and looked her in the eye. "I am not paying a fake fine. If you want to tow me, go ahead, but I will fight it." She smiled, tight and mean. "Your funeral. The tow company is already on speed dial." I watched her walk away, her gray jacket darkening in the drizzle. I stood there for a moment, rain tapping on my white bucket hat, holding my small measuring-free diagram packet under my arm. The packet had been sitting in my car for weeks, something I kept from a work project, just a few stapled pages showing generic street layouts with no readable text. I had not thought I would need it today, but now I was thinking about what proof I actually had. My phone had the photo. I had my lease. I had my decal. But I had a sinking feeling that none of that would matter to Tiffany unless I could corner her with something she could not spin. I got in my car and drove to the clubhouse. The Stonegate Reserve Parking Compliance Association was the kind of neighborhood where management enabled the loudest person, and Tiffany Cooper was the loudest. She had been treasurer for 3 years, and in that time, parking fines had tripled. Guest pass restrictions had become a maze of rules that changed every quarter, and residents had started avoiding the common areas altogether because Tiffany would patrol with that stamp and a clipboard. She kept a stack of blank tow authorization slips in her glove box, and everyone knew it because she had pulled one out at a board meeting once and waved it around like a trophy. I parked in the visitor lot this time, making sure I was nowhere near a curb that could be called a fire lane. I went inside and found the management office. The part-time clerk, a tired-looking guy in his 20s, barely looked up when I asked for a copy of the parking addendum and the fire lane ordinance. He handed me a stapled packet, no explanation, and went back to his computer. I sat in the lobby and flipped through it. The parking addendum was 8 pages long, single-spaced, and filled with clauses about decals, guest passes, overnight parking, commercial vehicles, and towing procedures. I found the section on fire lanes. It referenced the city code and said any curb painted red or marked with signage per city ordinance would be enforced as a fire lane. There was no mention of gray curbs. There was no mention of the board having the power to declare a fire lane without markings. I took photos of every page. Then I looked at the towing procedures section. It said the HOA must provide written notice of a violation, allow 48 hours for correction, and then schedule a hearing before authorizing a tow. Tiffany had skipped all of that. She had gone straight to the citation and the 2-hour threat. I felt a small surge of clarity. This was what I did for a living. I reviewed compliance documents, flagged gaps, and built cases for why a project was or was not following code. Tiffany had just handed me a textbook enforcement violation, and she had done it in front of a witness, because a mail carrier had been trying to get around cones and a wheel lift in the lane while she was yelling at me. I drove home and called my friend Marcus, a local paralegal who had helped me organize evidence packets for work a few times. He answered on the second ring. "What is going on?" I explained the situation. He whistled low. "She skipped the notice period. That is a slam dunk if you want to fight it." "Do you have the photo?" "Yeah. And I have the parking addendum. It clearly says 48 hours and a hearing." "Then you are covered. But you need to be ready for her to escalate. If she is the treasurer, she can threaten to revoke your parking permit, freeze your access to amenities, or even try to put a lien on your unit if she claims unpaid fees. You need to get ahead of it." I stopped arguing and started collecting, because the endgame was already set. I had the proof. I just needed to hold on to it until the right moment. Marcus told me to document everything, keep copies of all correspondence, and be ready to file in small claims if Tiffany tried to collect the fine. He also suggested I check if the HOA had properly noticed the guest pass rule change, because if she pushed it through without proper notice, that was another violation. I hung up and pulled up the HOA website. The minutes from last month's board meeting were posted. I scrolled through them. There it was, a line item under new business that said the board approved updated parking enforcement protocols effective immediately. No details. No copy of the new policy. Just a vague sentence and a vote count. I felt my pulse quicken. If Tiffany had pushed the policy through without proper notice and without distributing the new rules to residents, she had violated the HOA bylaws. That meant every citation she issued under the new policy was invalid. And that meant I had a trump card. The next morning, I woke up to a certified letter taped to my door. I did not even have to sign for it. Tiffany had just taped it there, rain-soaked and smeared. I opened it. It was a demand letter, typed on HOA letterhead, saying I owed $275 for the fire lane violation, plus a $50 administrative fee, and that failure to pay within 7 days would result in a lien filing and suspension of my parking privileges. The letter pretended the parking addendum was law, citing sections that did not exist, and using language that made it sound like the board had absolute authority. I took a photo of the letter and texted it to Marcus. He replied within minutes. "That is harassment. Keep it. You might need a restraining order if this keeps up." I went to work, but I could not focus. Every time I tried to review a spec sheet, I thought about Tiffany and that stack of blank tow authorization slips in her glove box. I thought about the mail carrier who had seen her yelling at me, and I wondered if they would remember. I thought about the tow company she had on speed dial, and I wondered if they even checked the paperwork before hooking up a car. That afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered. A man's voice, gruff and impatient, said he was with the tow company and they had an authorization to remove a vehicle from Stonegate Reserve. He gave me my plate number. I felt my stomach drop. "I am the owner," I said. "Who authorized this?" "Tiffany Cooper, HOA treasurer. She says you are in a fire lane." "I am not." "And she skipped the required notice period." "I have proof." There was a pause. "Look, man, I just hook them up and move them. If you have a dispute, take it up with her. I am standing here right now. If you tow my car without proper authorization, I will file a complaint with the city and sue the company. I have documentation that the HOA violated its own procedures." Another pause. He sighed. "I am already on site. Let me call dispatch." I hung up and ran outside. The tow truck was there, idling in the lot, amber lights flashing. A wheel lift was extended, and the driver was walking toward my car with a chain. I jogged over, holding my diagram packet like it was a legal brief. I waved at him. "Stop. Do not touch that car." He stopped, chain in hand, and looked at me. "You the owner?" "Yeah. And I have proof that the HOA is violating its own enforcement policy. If you tow me, you are complicit." He looked annoyed. "I already told you. I am just doing my job." "Then do it right. Ask for the enforcement policy. Ask to see the notice I was supposed to receive. If she cannot provide it, you do not have valid authorization." He pulled out his phone and called someone. I could hear a woman's voice on the other end, tinny and distant. He explained the situation. The woman said something I could not make out. He nodded and hung up. "She says you were noticed verbally." "That is not how it works. The policy requires written notice, 48 hours, and a hearing. I have the policy right here." I held up the diagram packet, even though it was not the actual policy. He did not know that. He hesitated. Before he could respond, Tiffany appeared, marching across the lot with her stamp and a clipboard. She looked at me, then at the driver. "What is the holdup?" "Tow it." He looked uncomfortable. "He says you did not follow procedure." She stepped closer, her black bucket hat dripping rain. "I followed procedure. I issued a citation. That is all the procedure I need." "No," I said, my voice loud enough to carry. "The parking addendum says written notice, 48 hours, and a hearing. You skipped all of it, and this is not a fire lane. The curb is not marked. You are making this up." She turned on me, her face twisting. "If you want mercy, move somewhere without an HOA." I had heard that line before. Twice now. It was starting to feel like her signature move, a verbal stamp she used to shut people down. I pulled out my phone and held it up, I have you on camera saying that. And I have photos of the curb. And I have the parking addendum. If you want to keep going, I will take all of it to small claims. The driver looked between us, then at his phone. He made another call. This time, the conversation was longer. He walked a few steps away, his voice low. I could see Tiffany's jaw working, her hands clenching the clipboard. She glared at me. You think you are smart, but I will bury you in notices until you run out of printer ink. There it was again, the boomerang line. I almost smiled. I wondered how many times she had said it, how many people she had scared off with that exact threat. I did not respond. I just waited. The driver came back. He looked at Tiffany. I need to see the written authorization and proof that the violation was properly noticed. My dispatch says we cannot proceed without it. Her face went red. I am the treasurer. I have the authority. Then show me the paperwork. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at me, then back at him. Fine. I will get it. But you are not leaving until I do. He shrugged. I am on the clock. Take your time. She stormed off toward the clubhouse. I watched her go, rain dripping off my bucket hat. The driver looked at me. You know she is going to come back with something. Probably. But it will not be valid. And if she tries to fake it, I will prove it. He nodded slowly. I have been doing this for 10 years. I have seen HOAs pull some shady stuff. But this one is something else. I felt a flicker of validation. If even the tow driver thought it was sketchy, I was on the right track. I waited, standing next to my car, watching the clubhouse door. The mail carrier I had seen yesterday drove by slowly, craning their neck to see what was happening. I gave a small wave. They waved back and kept going, but I could see them pull over a few houses down and take out their phone. I hoped they were taking photos. Tiffany came back 10 minutes later, holding a single sheet of paper. She handed it to the driver without looking at me. He read it, his eyebrows going up. This is a blank authorization form. It is not filled out. It is the form I use, she snapped. I am authorizing the tow right now. That is not how this works. I need a completed form with the violation details, the notice date, and your signature. This is just a template. She snatched it back. Then I will fill it out right now. You also need proof that he was noticed. Do you have a copy of the written notice you sent him? She hesitated. I gave it to him yesterday. No, you did not, I said. You taped a citation to my windshield and told me I had 2 hours. That is not written notice. That is harassment. She slammed her clipboard against my car hood, the sound echoing across the lot. The driver stepped back. Ma'am, you need to calm down. Do not tell me to calm down. This is my neighborhood. I make the rules. Actually, I said, keeping my voice steady, the bylaws make the rules. And you are breaking them. Her eyes narrowed. You want to play lawyer? Fine. I will show you what happens when you challenge the board. She pulled out her phone and made a call. I could hear her voice, clipped and furious, as she talked to someone. She hung up and looked at me. The board is having an emergency meeting tonight. You are required to attend. If you do not show up, we will proceed with enforcement in absentia. I felt a spike of adrenaline. That was exactly what I wanted. A meeting meant witnesses. It meant minutes. It meant I could put everything on the record. Fine. What time? 7. Clubhouse. I will be there. She turned and walked away, her stamp clutched in one hand, her clipboard in the other. The driver watched her go, then looked at me. "Good luck, man. You are going to need it." I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. I printed copies of the parking addendum, the board minutes, and the photos I had taken. I organized them into a folder with tabs, the same way I would for a work audit. Marcus called and offered to come with me as a witness. I said yes. I also called the mail carrier's route supervisor and left a message asking if the carrier who had been on my street yesterday could provide a statement. I did not know if it would go anywhere, but I wanted every angle covered. At 6:45, I drove to the clubhouse. The parking lot was nearly empty. I went inside and found the meeting room. It was a small space with a folding table and a few chairs. Tiffany was already there, sitting at the head of the table with two other board members, a man in his 60s who looked half asleep, and a woman in her 50s who kept checking her phone. Marcus arrived a few minutes later and sat next to me. Tiffany did not look at me. She opened the meeting by reading a prepared statement about the importance of parking compliance and the need for strict enforcement. She said the board had voted to update the guest pass rules and that residents were expected to comply immediately. She did not mention the lack of notice. She did not mention the 48-hour rule. When she finished, she looked at me. "You have been cited for a fire lane violation. Do you have anything to say?" I stood up. "Yes, I have a lot to say. First, the curb where I parked is not marked as a fire lane. No red paint. No signage. The parking addendum references city code, and city code requires visible markings. Second, you issued a citation without providing written notice, without allowing 48 hours for correction, and without scheduling a hearing. You violated the HOA's own enforcement policy. Third, you changed the guest pass rules without proper notice to residents. The board minutes show the policy was approved effective immediately, but no copy of the new rules was distributed. That is a bylaw violation." She cut me off. "The board has the authority to enforce rules as we see fit, not without following your own procedures. I have copies of the parking addendum right here." I held up my folder. Section 4. Subsection C. Written notice required. 48 hours to correct. Hearing before towing. You skipped all of it. The other two board members looked at each other. The man leaned forward. "Tiffany, did we approve skipping the notice period?" She hesitated. "We approved streamlined enforcement." "That is not an answer," I said. "Did you or did you not follow the written notice requirement?" She did not respond. Marcus leaned over and whispered, "Ask them to read the policy into the minutes." I looked at the board. "I would like to request that the enforcement policy be read into the minutes so there is a clear record of what the rules actually are." Tiffany's face went tight. "That is not necessary." "I think it is. If you are going to enforce a rule, everyone should know what it says." The woman with the phone looked up. "I agree. Let's hear it." Tiffany pulled out a copy of the parking addendum and read the section I had cited. Her voice was flat, mechanical. When she finished, the room was silent. The man cleared his throat. "So we are supposed to give written notice and 48 hours. Did you do that?" She set the document down. "I issued a citation. That is written notice." "No," I said. "A citation is not the same as notice. Notice gives the resident a chance to correct the issue. A citation is a penalty. You skipped the correction period and went straight to enforcement. The woman put down her phone. Tiffany, this does not look good. If he fights this, we could lose. Tiffany stood up, her chair scraping back. I am the treasurer. I know what I am doing. If you do not back me on this, we look weak. We look worse if we lose in court, the man said. I move that we rescind the citation and follow the proper procedure going forward. Second, the woman said. Tiffany's face went dark. You are making a mistake. Call the vote, Marcus said quietly. Tiffany glared at him, then at me. Fine. All in favor of rescinding the citation? The man and the woman raised their hands. Tiffany did not. The citation is rescinded, the man said. Meeting adjourned. Tiffany gathered her papers and walked out without another word. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of relief and unease. I had won this round, but I knew it was not over. She had said she would bury me in notices, and I believed her. Over the next 2 weeks, I got 5 more certified letters. Each one was a fabricated violation notice with altered dates and recycled photos. One said I had parked in a guest spot without a guest pass, even though I had parked in my assigned space. Another said my decal was expired, even though I had renewed it online and had the confirmation email. A third said I had left trash cans out past collection day, even though the photo was from a different unit. Each letter demanded fees ranging from $50 to $200. I documented everything. I took time-stamped photos of my car in my assigned space. I printed my decal renewal confirmation. I emailed the management company to report the harassment. They replied with a generic message saying they would look into it. Nothing changed. Marcus told me to file a harassment complaint with the county. I did. The county sent a letter to the HOA board asking them to respond. Tiffany sent back a letter saying I was a problem resident who refused to follow rules. She attached copies of the citations as evidence. The county closed the case, saying it was a civil matter. I was running out of options. My lender had started asking questions about the HOA correspondence, and I was terrified they would trigger an audit. I needed to end this before it spiraled further. That was when I remembered the trump card. I had been holding on to the board minutes and the enforcement policy, waiting for the right moment. The right moment was now. I called Marcus. We need to go to small claims. I want to sue the HOA for harassment and demand a restraining order against Tiffany. Do you have enough evidence? I have everything. Fabricated notices, recycled photos, violations of the enforcement policy. And I have proof that she pushed the policy through without proper notice. Then let's do it. If you are enjoying this chaos, hit that like button and subscribe for more wild HOA drama. I filed the claim the next day. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, Tiffany escalated again. She sent a letter saying the HOA was revoking my parking permit immediately, and that I would be towed on site if I parked in any HOA-controlled space. The letter cited unpaid fines, even though I had not paid any of them, because they were all invalid. I called the management company. They said Tiffany had the authority to revoke permits for non-compliance. I asked if they had reviewed the citations. They said they trusted the board's judgment. I felt my frustration boiling over. I was dealing with a system where the loudest person won by default, and everyone else was too tired or too scared to push back. Marcus suggested I contact a local news reporter who had done a series on HOA abuse. I sent an email with copies of the letters and the board minutes. The reporter replied within an hour. She wanted to interview me. I said yes. The interview happened at a coffee shop. The reporter asked about the citations, the enforcement policy, and Tiffany's behavior. I showed her the photos, the letters, and the board minutes. She took notes and said she would follow up after the hearing. I did not know if the story would ever run, but it felt good to have someone listen. The night before the hearing, I could not sleep. I kept running through the evidence in my head, making sure I had covered every angle. My doorbell camera had captured Tiffany's intimidation at my door one night when she had come by to hand-deliver another citation. I had the video saved, and Marcus had told me it was gold. I planned to ask for the evidence to be read into the minutes, so it became official. The hearing was at 9 in the morning. I arrived early with Marcus and the folder of evidence. Tiffany showed up 10 minutes late with a lawyer, a sharp-dressed man who looked like he had done 1,000 of these cases. My stomach sank. I had not expected her to bring legal representation. The judge was a woman in her 50s, no nonsense and efficient. She asked Tiffany to present her case first. The lawyer stood up and gave a smooth, rehearsed summary. He said I was a problem resident who had repeatedly violated parking rules, refused to pay fines, and harassed the board with frivolous complaints. He presented copies of the citations as evidence. When he finished, the judge looked at me. "Your turn." I stood up and opened my folder. I started with the parking addendum. I showed the judge the section requiring written notice, 48 hours, and a hearing. I explained that Tiffany had skipped all of those steps. Then I showed the fabricated notices with altered dates and recycled photos. I pointed out the inconsistencies. I showed the doorbell video of Tiffany at my door, her voice loud and threatening, saying she would bury me in notices until I ran out of printer ink. The judge watched the video without expression. Then I pulled out the board minutes. I showed the judge the line item approving the updated enforcement policy effective immediately, with no details and no distribution to residents. I explained that the bylaws required notice for any rule changes. I said Tiffany had pushed the policy through without proper notice, and that every citation issued under the new policy was invalid. The judge looked at Tiffany's lawyer. "Do you have evidence that the policy was properly noticed?" He hesitated. "The board approved it." "That is not what I asked. Do you have evidence that residents were notified?" He did not respond. The judge looked at Tiffany. "Miss Cooper, did you distribute the new policy to residents?" Tiffany shifted in her seat. "We posted the minutes online." "Did you send a direct notice to each resident?" "No. But the bylaws do not require that." The judge looked at the bylaws I had included in my evidence. She read for a moment, then looked up. Section 7 says any rule change must be noticed to residents in writing at least 14 days before taking effect. Your minutes show the policy was effective immediately. That is a violation. Tiffany's lawyer started to argue, but the judge cut him off. "I have seen enough. The citations were issued without following the HOA's own procedures. The policy was not properly noticed, and the evidence shows a pattern of harassment. I am granting the plaintiff's request for a temporary restraining order barring Miss Cooper from ordering any towing action against the plaintiff, and requiring the HOA to use a neutral process for parking enforcement going forward. The HOA will also pay the plaintiff's court costs." I felt a wave of relief so strong I almost sat down. Tiffany's face went white. The judge continued. "Miss Cooper, I strongly suggest you review the bylaws and follow them. If this comes back to my court, I will not be lenient." The hearing ended. Tiffany and her lawyer left without speaking to me. Marcus clapped me on the back. "You did it." I nodded, still processing. The restraining order meant Tiffany could not touch me. The neutral process meant the board would have to oversee enforcement instead of letting her run wild. And the court costs meant the HOA had to pay for their own abuse. A week later, the board held another meeting. Tiffany was not there. The other two board members explained that she had been asked to step down as treasurer and that she could not spin it. The vote had been unanimous. They apologized for the harassment and said they would be implementing new oversight procedures to prevent it from happening again. The mail carrier who had seen the confrontation sent me a letter. They said they had been dealing with Tiffany's enforcement for months and were glad someone had finally stood up to her. They offered to serve as a witness if anything else came up. I thanked them and filed the letter with the rest of my evidence. The local news story ran a few days later. It did not name Tiffany directly, but it described the case and included quotes from me and the judge. The reporter ended the piece with a line about HOAs needing accountability and residents needing to know their rights. I got a few emails from other Stonegate Reserve residents saying they had experienced similar harassment and were considering filing their own complaints. The final piece came a month later. I was at the tow staging spot at the edge of the neighborhood, the same place where Tiffany had tried to have my car hooked up. I had asked the tow driver to meet me there because I wanted to show him the proof I had gathered. I pulled out the enforcement policy and the board minutes. I explained how Tiffany had been skipping required steps on purpose. The driver looked at the documents, then at me. "Man, I wish you had shown me this the first time. We would have walked away immediately. I am showing you now so it does not happen to someone else." He nodded. "Noted. If she calls again, I am asking for the full paper trail." That was exactly what I wanted. A tow vendor refusing to act without proper authorization. The whole system had been built on fear and intimidation, and it had collapsed the moment someone asked for proof. I walked back to my car, rain tapping on my bucket hat, and felt something I had not felt in months: peace. The HOA had lost in small claims and paid costs. Tiffany had been told to step down and she could not spin it. And the final funny karma beat was perfect. Karen had insisted it was a fire lane issue, and the actual curb markings and ordinance proved she was wrong. I drove home, parked in my assigned space, and went inside. The stack of blank tow authorization slips Tiffany had kept in her glove box was now worthless. The small handheld stamp she had slammed onto paper so many times was collecting dust somewhere. And the neighborhood was a little quieter, a little less hostile. Thanks for watching, and I appreciate you being here.